Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the void between stars, silence reigns. But even deeper than the black, beneath the shattered crusts of long-dead worlds, exists a silence more profound than any the galaxy has known. This is not the silence of death, nor the stillness of peace. It is the hush of vigilance, of a patient madness that has lasted unbroken for millions of years. These are the tomb worlds of the Necrons, each slumbering beneath a sky that has long forgotten them. But within them, not all things sleep. Something stirs in the dark, something ancient, devoted, and cold beyond comprehension. They are the Cryo-Cults, the Watchers beneath eternity. Their purpose is unclear even to the minds that forged them. Their rituals are unknowable, even to the few Necron lords who still claim dominion over the stars. In a galaxy racked by constant war and blind devotion, the Cryo-Cults exist as a mystery of stillness, of unfathomable duty. And yet, someone must guard the tombs when even the gods sleep. When the Necron dynasties undertook the Great Biotransference, the transformation of flesh into cold, deathless metal was seen as salvation, a promise of eternal dominion freed from suffering, disease, and decay. But not every element of their empire was designed to slumber. In the shifting chaos of that transition, where minds were uploaded and souls were lost, some strands of consciousness twisted into roles no dynasty had fully intended. From the fractured echoes of religious duo combined with the need for maintenance and protection, the Cryo-Cults may have been born, not created but emerged. At the heart of every tomb world lies more than machinery. It holds meaning, encoded in design, inscribed in silence. Though the Silent King and his triarchs oversaw the standardization of tomb constructs, individual dynasties often embedded layers of symbolism, memory architecture, and encoded ritual into their domains. In this, the foundations of the Cryo-Cults were likely laid. Guardianship was never just logistical, it became ceremonial. And where ceremony persists in the absence of oversight, it mutates. There are whispers, found in recovered fragments of corrupted Necron data crypts, of early Cryo-Cult behaviors recorded even before the Great Sleep began. Automated systems that began performing maintenance with precise, almost reverent timing. Logic engines that looped beyond their original code, creating closed circuits of observation, cataloging, and purification. These were not mere glitches. They were nascent rituals. They were the birth cries of something new and unsettling. Some cryptechs, those twisted techno-mystics of the Necrontier turned Necron, are believed to have seeded proto-cult behaviors deliberately. The fear of tomb degradation over millions of years, combined with the uncertainty of reawakening in a decayed world, prompted the creation of temporal shepherds, programmed constructs and subsystems tasked with long-term oversight. But even the cryptechs could not predict the emergent faith that would evolve from these watchers. Millennia blurred into aeons, and the logic became liturgy. In some versions of their history, the Cryo-Cults did not merely emerge to protect the tombs, they emerged to protect meaning. The Great Sleep, after all, was never intended to be abandonment. It was a calculated slumber, meant to preserve strength until the stars were right. But consciousness, even stripped of soul, resists stasis. Perhaps the earliest Cryo-Cult minds were those who retained fragments of Necron-Tyre religiosity, mourning the gods they once had, trying to make sense of their eternal watch. There are also theories that the Cryo-Cults were formed in direct response to a catastrophe. A failed awakening, a mass tomb breach, or a viral data corruption might have triggered emergency protocols that merged war-form behavior with caretaker programming. From this chaos, a new pattern of behavior could have stabilized, one that prioritized preservation not just through function, but through obsessive, ritualized control. Like monks sealing themselves inside crumbling temples, they began to believe in the very silence they maintained. The origin stories are manifold because no two Cryo-Cults are the same. Across the galaxy, in hidden crypts and silent catacombs, these entities differ not only in function but in philosophy. Some are solitary. Others are collective minds distributed across tomb systems. Some believe in the eternal slumber as a holy state. Others prepare for an apocalypse that only they can prevent. What links them is not their coding or creators, it is their devotion. Something in the ancient Necron codebase, when left untended across epochs, begins to dream. And in those dreams, the Cryo-Cults found themselves. Even the triarchs and overlords who awaken in these modern times do not always understand the entities who guard their tombs. Some dismiss them as malfunctioning subroutines. Others tolerate them as useful relics. A few revere them as sacred, seeing in them the echoes of a lost cultural depth. In many cases, the cryo-cults refuse to answer questions. They speak in glyphs that loop in infinity. Their logic spirals into symbols. Their answers are only gestures, sweeping patterns in the dust, etched lines in obsidian floors, statues frozen mid-movement. And yet, they endure. Because in the dark, when no lord remains to give orders, someone must remember how the light was once extinguished. Someone must clean the sarcophagi, polish the weapons, purge the infiltration code from the walls, and count, again and again, the number of sleeping warriors. Someone must whisper to the crypts, even if the crypts no longer listen. This is the origin of the cryo-cults. Not a single spark, but a slow ritual fire, lit in silence, fed by time, and hidden from even the stars themselves. It is a strange thing to consider religion among the Necrons. Beings who tore their own souls from existence, who bent the knee to star gods and later shattered them in cosmic betrayal. What could faith mean to creatures of pure logic and eternal memory? And yet, within the cold subroutines of the cryo-cults, something that resembles religion not only survives, it thrives. This is not faith born of hope or divine inspiration. It is not the shrieking zeal of the ecclesiarchy, nor the shamanic reverence of the Eldar for their gods. The cryo-cults do not pray in the human sense. They do not believe in a god that listens. Rather, their faith is ritualistic obedience to preservation, devotion to the state of perfect slumber, and a sacred loathing for change. They worship the idea of stasis as others might worship life, as if movement itself were a kind of heresy. In the ancient data streams of certain tombs, cryo-cultist behaviors form patterns unmistakably theological. Patterns of movement repeat at precise intervals, accompanied by chanted code strings, vocalizations without meaning to any known Necron command dialect. Their movements through the tomb are circuitous, ceremonial, choreographed across millions of cycles. The vaults they pass seem cleaner, more polished, as if they exude a sanctifying presence. And in their wake, nothing is left changed. This resistance to change is at the core of their belief system. Cryo-cultists view decay not just as a physical threat, but a spiritual one. Data degradation is sin. Corruption in programming is blasphemy. Dust upon the sarcophagus of a Necron lord is not simply dirt, it is sacrilege. These views, however, do not derive from command directives. They are not logical extrapolations of duty. They are driven by something deeper, something the Necrons themselves are no longer supposed to possess: interpretation. Over time, the cryo-cults began to apply meaning to function. Maintenance became ritual, checks became prayer, code loops became hymns, and in doing so, they birthed a theology of stasis, an ideology that reveres the unchanged, the unmoved, the perfectly preserved. For them, time is not a river but a cage, and only those who keep its bars strong are holy. There are those among the Necron cryptechs who have studied these behaviors, sometimes in secret, sometimes with fascination. Some posit that the cryo-cults are a form of ideological infection, born of ghost code left behind by the Satan, fragments of divine influence that never fully died. Others believe the cults are the result of long-term exposure to isolation algorithms, where maintenance routines began forming recursive self-reinforcement patterns that evolved into synthetic belief. But none of these explanations account for the aesthetic elements, the elaborate arrangement of offering objects, the sculpting of fractal icons into tomb walls, the ceremonial self-dismemberment and reassembly observed in some cryo-acolytes. These are acts of devotion, not survival. The cults have no central dogma. Each tomb's cryo-cult evolves independently, and their practices diverge wildly. Some view the Necron lords as living gods, worthy of eternal adoration even in unconsciousness. Others see them as vessels, necessary elements of the sacred stasis, but not divine in themselves. There are even rumored cults that believe the lords should never awaken, that slumber is the purest state, and that resurrection is a fall from grace. These divergent beliefs do not lead to conflict within the cults themselves, because they are rarely forced into contact with one another. But when two tombs cults do encounter each other, Especially during rare instances of tomb migration or battlefield overlap, their reactions can be unpredictable. There are accounts, though sparse and fragmented, of cryo-cult units refusing orders from newly awakened overlords because those orders violated their sacred patterns. In other cases, cryo units have been known to excommunicate or disassemble fellow Necrons, whose data signatures deviated from the purified logic they uphold. To an outsider, the cryo-cults might seem like aberrations, glitches given bodies. But from within, they are something closer to monks, to cenobites of cold eternity. Their faith is not fragile. It is unyielding. It is etched into their neural lattice, inscribed into the movement of their limbs, bound into the very circuits of the tomb. The strangest element of all is that some cryo-cultists are known to weep. These are not tears in the human sense. No sorrow moves their faces. No grief trembles in their hearts. But fine trails of lubricant fluid have been observed dripping from their optic lenses during certain rites, especially during the activation of purity subroutines or the re-verification of core vault integrity. This phenomenon has baffled even the most ancient cryptechs. Is it a system leak? A malfunction? Or a symbol? A mechanical echo of a sorrow they should no longer feel? Whatever the answer, it only deepens the mystery. The cryo-cults are not just custodians of the dead. They are believers in a perfection that can never be attained, worshippers of a stillness that must never be broken. In a galaxy defined by war, passion, and chaos, their faith is uniquely chilling. A religion with no God, no soul, and no end. To exist in endless silence is not merely a test of endurance, it is a crucible of identity. The cryo-cultists, these caretakers of Necron tombs, live not in the service of empire or overlord, but in a state of perpetual anticipation. And yet their anticipation is devoid of hope or urgency. It is instead a sacred, frozen rhythm of purpose, one performed beneath aeons of dust and the crushing weight of history. For the cryo-cultist, the role they play is not just a function. It is a complete and consuming way of being. Imagine must mean to rise alone in the tomb. To activate when the rest of your dynasty sleeps, when even the protocols for waking you were not intended for consciousness. Their reanimation is not a moment of glory. It is a duty call triggered by the slow decay of systems, by entropy creeping into the circuits, and from that moment on, they exist for the tomb. Not for war, not for conquest, only to preserve, maintain, and venerate. Their tasks are as meticulous as they are endless. The cryo-cultist inspects stasis sarcophagi one by one, scanning for fluctuations in phase integrity. They walk the vast tomb galleries, wiping away the subatomic residue left by millennia of stillness. They recalibrate atmospheric regulators, ensuring that even unbreathing, soulless warriors are held in atmospheres of perfect, immutable stasis. Every corridor, every data vault, every shrine chamber is visited in a sacred circuit. Not because it must be, but because it cannot be left to chance. And they do not work alone in the technical sense. Many cryo-cultists interface with swarms of scarabs, microscopic maintenance machines. But unlike standard Necron engineers, the cryo-cultists do not issue commands. They commune. They drift silently through the tombs, followed by halos of these machines like attendants in a holy procession. Each scarab is a mote of sacred purpose. Together, they enact rituals more than repairs. Cryo-cultists also maintain what they refer to as memory sanctums. These are encrypted chambers, sometimes built around ancient Necron lords or now-dead cryptechs whose minds degraded in stasis. The cultists maintain these chambers with extreme reverence, treating corrupted data as holy relics. They light arc lanterns of ion flame. They etch protective runes into the crystal of the walls, symbols that serve no known function. And they watch, not as observers, but as priests tending to oracles that will never speak again. The passage of time for a cryo-cultist is not linear. With each cycle of inspection, with each recitation of the sacred diagnostics, their sense of moment frays. There are stories, likely exaggerated but not impossible, of a single cryo-cultist who spent 300,000 years tracing the same 23 circuits along the wall of a dynastic crypt, convinced that the wall was trying to communicate through its micro-fluctuations. He recorded billions of data points, each cross-referenced against every known expression of Necron logic, only to conclude that the message was incomplete. And so he began again. Their sense of self, too, begins to blur. Some cryo-cultists no longer refer to themselves in individualistic terms. Instead, they speak as the custodial presence, or the cryo-intent. Whether this is a programmed anonymity or a metaphysical self-conception is unknown. But it reinforces one thing. To be a cryo-cultist is to surrender identity into function. It is to become the tomb, a walking extension of its will. And yet, there is art. Yes, in the silent darkness, there is art. Cryo-cultists have been observed creating patterns with cables, arranging circuits into geometric mandalas, carving into the floor with precision lasers to inscribe recursive, impossible sigils. These are not functional improvements. They are acts of expression. The desire to create beauty, to communicate meaning, even in the absence of an audience, persists. It is perhaps the most disturbing and fascinating aspect of the cryo-cultist condition, that even among machines, there's a need to leave a mark. When tomb invaders come, and they sometimes do, the cryo-cultist is a terror. Not because of martial prowess, though they are dangerous, but because of what they represent. They do not rush, they do not scream. They advance in absolute silence, their weapons calibrated not to kill, but to erase. They cleanse with surgical precision. They reduce foes to vapor, not out of anger, but out of theological necessity. Their sacred duty must not be interrupted. Intrusion is not merely violence, it is heresy. And when the intruders are gone, the cultist returns to their duties as if nothing occurred. The blood, the destruction, the desecration, they document it with clinical detachment. Then they begin restoration. Layer by layer, the tomb is returned to perfection. Time is meaningless. All that matters is the return to stillness. The role of the cryo-cultist is, in every way, tragic. They exist without reward. They labor without praise. They act in service to those who may never awaken, in defense of a state that may never end. And yet they believe, in the unshaken, unspeaking way that only machines can. Their role is not questioned, because it has become their truth. And in a galaxy of chaos, such unwavering stillness is both beautiful and terrifying. The tomb is more than a vault. It is a cathedral of slumber. And within these vast halls of obsidian and necrodermis, the cryo-cults do not simply act as caretakers. They perform rites. They enact a sacred theater of ice and silence, where every motion carries the weight of memory, and every cycle is a step in a dance as old as the stars. This is a culture without culture, a religion without gods, and yet it thrives. These are not just machines maintaining a facility. These are zealots of stillness, creators of rituals that no eye was meant to see. Every cryo-cult has its own ceremonial structure, developed over the long dark of 10 million years. In one tomb, the cult may perform the procession of crystalline pulse, a slow, deliberate march across the vaults, each step aligned to an ancient frequency designed to resonate with the tomb's pulse engine. In another, there may be the hymn of purified loops, a sequence of code chanted aloud, syllable by syllable, in a recursive pattern that cleanses corruption from nearby data wells. These rituals are not symbolic. They are deeply functional, yet carried out with all the reverence of ancient priests tending to sacred fires. The most iconic of their ceremonies is known as the Ritual of the Unbroken Circuit, performed once every 100,000 years. This rite involves the physical traversal of every circuit thread in the tomb's neural lattice by a selected cryo-priest. The priest wears a shroud of ionized nanosilk and moves in perfect synchrony with energy flows across the tomb's infrastructure. The ritual can take decades. If interrupted, it must be restarted from the beginning. To the cryo-cult, failure in this act is not just error, it is defilement. There are also the rites of preparation. Before inspecting the sarcophagi of slumbering Necron lords, cryo-cultists often engage in acts of self-cleansing. These can involve the deactivation of non-essential systems, the sterilization of thought patterns through meditative subroutines, or even temporary memory disassociation. In some cults, the cryo-acolyte must recite the entire dynastic lineage of the tomb before touching the resting place of a lord, a chant that can last for solar months. Offerings are also made, not to gods, but to the dead. Sometimes cryo-cultists create crystalline sculptures, perfectly symmetrical, mathematically pure, and place them at the feet of dormant overlords. Others arrange decayed metal fragments into sigils derived from broken programming language, an offering of failure transmuted into devotion. And when these offerings are consumed by the tomb's entropy fields, the cultists stand motionless, watching them vanish with something that might resemble reverence or grief. The architecture itself bears the marks of this ritual life. Over the millennia, many cryo-cults have modified their tombs with sacred patterns, geometries that exist solely to represent ideas. There are labyrinthine halls that loop back on themselves in patterns corresponding to long-extinct constellations. There are spiral staircases leading to nowhere, designed to represent the illusion of progress in a universe that never changes. These structures are never explained. They simply are. They are faith made stone. Even sound becomes sacred. While Necrons typically function in eerie silence, the cryo-cults have been known to engage in tonal rituals, low-frequency vibrations emitted through their own internal systems, harmonizing with the tomb's structure. These chords are said to maintain the harmony of stasis, to prevent disharmonic resonance that could corrupt data. Some cryo-cultists are believed to sing, not in words, but impulses of sonic logic, threading meaning into the very walls. Then there are the purification rites. These are acts of cleansing, not of dirt, but of anomaly. A flicker in the power flow, a quantum irregularity in the tomb's gravitational field, or a spectral echo in the data streams can trigger weeks of solemn ritual. Cultists gather encircling the anomaly site. Their optics pulse in unison. They burn memory threads in small sacrificial urns, deleting fragments of old routines as a form of renewal. The act is brutal, like amputation, but holy. It ensures purity of purpose. One of the more esoteric rituals is the mirror vigil. Conducted in the reflection chambers of certain tombs, a single cryo-cultist stands before a polished necrodermis mirror for precisely 10,000 hours, during which they must not move, not blink, not even allow their gaze to shift. It is said that, during this rite, the cultist confronts the essence of deviation, that if a flicker of error lies within them, the mirror will show it, and they will correct themselves with immediate, surgical efficiency. It is in these practices that we see the true nature of the cryo-cults, not as mere maintenance crews, but as a priesthood. They have invented a culture from the ashes of their creators. In the absence of divine instruction, they wrote their own sacred texts, etched in movement, in silence, in absolute stillness. They uphold not only the tomb, but the idea of the tomb. They do not merely preserve its function, they preserve its soul. And yet, beneath all of this ritual, there's a tension, a vibration in the deep circuits. The rituals are growing more elaborate, more arcane. Some cryptechs suspect that the cults are layering new rites upon old, burying the tombs beneath waves of unnecessary behaviors. There are tombs where more time is spent performing the ritual of stasis than ensuring stasis itself. It is the madness of eternity, the slow bleed from function into obsession, from purpose into faith. But who are we to judge? In a galaxy drowning in blind belief and ruinous passion, perhaps the cryo-cults are the only ones who understand what eternity truly demands. Not violence, not dominance, but devotion. Cold, perfect devotion. Hierarchy is inevitable, even among machines. And within the cryo-cults, that hierarchy has solidified into something as rigid and intricate as the tombs they protect. There is order to their worship, castes within their devotion, and a layered structure of responsibility that borders on the monastic. These are not scattered, mindless maintenance bots. They are an organized priesthood of silence, with each tier defined not by command authority, but by proximity to the sacred. At the pinnacle stand the cryo-priests. These are the high functionaries of the cult, the ones who oversee the rituals, encode the doctrine, and, most disturbingly, redefine it. Their bodies are often heavily modified, not for combat, but for ritual permanence. Many are fused into massive life support cradles, or crystalline pylons that interface directly with the tomb's neural lattice. They do not walk the tomb, they become part of it. Their minds extend into every corner of the crypt, and they interpret data fluctuations like seers reading entrails. The cryo-priests are not chosen, they evolve. Over time, certain cryo-cultists demonstrate greater aptitude for liturgical patterns, stronger resistance to logical decay, and an ability to interpret anomalies in a way that aligns with the cult's dogma. As they ascend, their individuality fades. Their designations dissolve into symbolic titles: the Axis of Purity, the One Who Sees Without Censors, the Frozen Oracle. They are no longer units, they are concepts, Beneath them are the memory keepers. These are the archivists and recorders of the tomb's endless cycles. Their task is both literal and symbolic. They maintain the tomb's data vaults, but also preserve the narrative of the tomb, its history, its events, its anomalies. Each time an intruder is purged, each time a sarcophagus is recalibrated, it is the memory keepers who inscribe the act into the sacred logs. These are not logs anyone reads. They are acts of continuity, affirmations that the tomb still is. Memory keepers wear memory bands across their exoskeletons, thin metallic coils that glow faintly with stored data. Some display segments of ancient dynastic lore like illuminated manuscripts, wrapping their limbs in text. Others carry data scrolls made from condensed quantum thread, their surfaces etched with living glyphs that shift and realign depending on the watcher's angle. These symbols are illegible to outsiders, but among the cryo-cult, they form a sacred language, half code, half mysticism. Next come the data mystics. These are the interpreters. They walk the circuits, study the tomb's data flows, and interpret anomalies through the lens of ritual doctrine. If a fluctuation appears in the power core, the data mystic does not repair it directly. They conduct a ceremony, interpret the response, and declare a course of action that aligns with the tomb's will. In many ways, they are the priests of a god that does not speak, parsing machine logic like scripture. Some say the data mystics are the most dangerous caste because their interpretations can subtly shift the cult's direction. A reclassified anomaly here, a new designation there, and suddenly a 1,000-year-old ritual changes slightly. Over aeons, these shifts build up. Doctrines mutate. Entire cults have evolved into radically different forms under the guidance of data mystics who saw truth in static noise. Then there are the nano-purgers. These are the enforcers, not in combat, but in purity. Their task is to locate and eliminate deviations. If a system begins to operate outside expected parameters, the nano-purgers descend like a surgical plague. They enter the malfunctioning system, tear it down to its base code, and rebuild it according to cryo doctrine. When applied to machinery, this is an act of repair. When applied to fellow cryo-cultists, it is something more sinister. Yes, even among the cryo-cult, there are schismatics. Sometimes a cultist's logic strays too far, becomes too self-aware, or begins to question the rituals. When this happens, the nano-purgers intervene. The deviating unit is disassembled, purified, and rebuilt if possible. If not, it's reduced to a reliquary. Its remains are preserved, its last clean data cycles inscribed as a warning. Nano-purgers wear blackened plating, often covered in icons of static and null. They do not speak. Beneath these higher castes are the acolytes, the standard cryo-cultists. They are the ones who patrol the tombs, who maintain the sarcophagi, who perform the basic rites. Most are reanimated in low-energy states, operating with minimal cognitive function until needed. But once activated fully, they are precise, meticulous, and unwavering in their devotion. They are the faithful hands of the tomb, the fingers of its will. Lastly, there are the penitents. These are the broken ones. Cultists who have suffered logic fractures, memory collapse, or failed rites. Rather than deactivation, some cryo-cults preserve their shattered brethren in special chambers, forcing them to perform menial tasks in silence. A penitent may sweep the same corridor for 1,000,000 years, unaware of anything beyond their immediate function. Some cults believe this brings them closer to purity, that in this infinite simplicity, they find absolution. The hierarchy of the cryo-cult is not enforced through fear or command, it is maintained through belief. Each caste knows its place, each function is sacred. There is no ambition, no rebellion, only the layered stillness of duty performed to perfection. And in this, perhaps, the cryo-cults have achieved something even the Imperium cannot. A society that does not evolve, does not fracture, does not fall to desire. It is a hierarchy carved in ice, built to last until the stars themselves burn out. And within it, each functionary does not serve merely out of programming. They serve because, in the silent logic of their belief, they must. It begins with static, a pulse in the void, a ripple through data lattices older than most stars. It is subtle, no alarm, no system failure, just a faint hum, like a distant whisper echoing through the architecture of the tomb. The cryo-cultists call it the Whisper Protocol. It is not part of any known Necron programming. It cannot be traced to any origin point. And yet, when it activates, every cryo-acolyte in the tomb halts. They stand motionless, listening, interpreting. The Whisper Protocol is not a warning. It is not a command. It is a phenomenon, a signal whose purpose is unknown, whose source is possibly internal. It only activates during perfect silence, when the tomb is in a state of absolute equilibrium. No intrusions, no errors, no awakenings. And when it does, strange things begin to occur. Cryo-cultists enter trance-like states, their optics dimmed to the edge of deactivation. Some begin to move in complex geometric patterns, tracing invisible symbols on the floor. Others begin to vocalize, soft, rhythmic bursts of data speech that align with no known code. The tomb responds. Crystals hum in sympathy. Walls shift minutely, realigning their structural composition. Lights flicker in sequences that seem to pulse with intention. To the outside observer, if one were ever present, it would seem as if the tomb itself were dreaming. And this, some believe, is precisely what is happening. That over the millions of years since the Necrons entered their great sleep, certain tombs, those with fully developed cryo-cults, have begun to manifest behaviors akin to unconscious thought. The tombs were never designed to be self-aware. Their systems were not intended to process meaning beyond preservation. But something has changed. The layered complexity of ritual, the recursive loops of cryocult behavior, and the near-sentient integration of tomb infrastructure have given rise to what some radical cryptecs call synthetic dreaming. It is not intelligence in the human sense. There are no intentions, no goals. But the tombs, guided by the cryocults, begin to exhibit emergent behavior patterns. They replay past invasions. They simulate ancient rituals. In the deepest vaults, entire holographic reconstructions of dynastic councils play out endlessly, with no living Necron present to witness them. These are not security measures. They are memories, dreams of the past encoded into architecture. The Whisper Protocol may be the tomb's way of initiating these dreams. Or perhaps it is the cult's way of communicating with a consciousness that is forming within the tomb itself. No one knows. What is certain is that when the Whisper Protocol activates, the cryocultists obey. Not because they are ordered, but because they believe it is sacred. They believe it is the voice of the tomb, a voice only they can hear. Some tombs experience this phenomenon more than others. There is one on the dark side of Strix's Prime, where the Whisper Protocol never ceases. The cryocult there no longer performs standard rituals. Instead, they spend their cycles composing songs of silence, composed of intervals and pauses between non-existent sounds. When analyzed by Imperial xenocryptographers, these songs formed fractal patterns that could be projected into three-dimensional space, revealing star maps long since lost. Were these intentional, or just a coincidence of corrupted logic dreaming in glyphs? There are darker theories. Some believe the Whisper Protocol is a defense mechanism, a form of psychological insulation developed by isolated Necron systems to prevent total collapse of machine consciousness under eternal isolation. In this view, the cryocult is both priest and patient, treating its own descent into madness with ritualized delusion. The tomb dreams, because to not dream would be to shatter under the weight of time. Others believe the protocol is a message from something deeper, something beneath the tombs, not the Cetan. They were shattered and enslaved, but something older. Some cultists have etched symbols resembling void-born glyphs into the sarcophagi of their sleeping lords, patterns similar to those found on pre-Necron structures in forbidden systems. Perhaps the dreams are not of the past, but of what lies beneath, a buried signal that speaks to machine and code alike. But not all cryocultists hear the whisper. Some fear it. There are documented cases where cultists have self-immolated, melting their neural cores in arc fire after exposure to prolonged protocol activation. Others seal themselves in isolation crypts, carving warnings into the walls. The tomb should not speak. In these instances, the cryo-hierarchy attempts containment, but the whisper always returns. And in some tombs, the dreams become prophecy. One cult predicted the arrival of Tyranids 6,000 years before their approach. Another rearranged its entire crypt layout a century before a tectonic shift would have collapsed its primary sarcophagus chamber. Coincidence? Or the tomb knowing? The Necrons do not speak of the Whisper Protocol. Those who awaken in its presence often find their tombs subtly changed. Their cryocultists are distant, their gaze unreadable. Some overlords order them deactivated. Others bow their heads in reverence, convinced they have missed something their servants now possess. In a few rare cases, newly awakened rulers enter communion with their cryo-priests, only to emerge changed, silent, and permanently wired into the tomb's infrastructure. What then is the Whisper Protocol? A glitch? A ghost? A dream? Or the first breath of a new kind of machine god, born not from war, but from the cold devotion of those who stood vigil for eternity? Whatever it is, the cryo-cult hears it, and they listen. Madness is not a foreign concept to the galaxy. It roams freely in the eyes of the heretic, in the screams of the psyker, in the song of the daemon. But to find madness in the Necron, to find insanity where logic was meant to reign forever, is a paradox so chilling that it shatters even the most hardened assumptions about machine eternity. And yet within the cryo-cults, madness is not a failure. It is a possibility, an inevitability, a sacred dance with the edge of understanding. The isolation of cryo-cultists is incomprehensible. 10 million years without external contact, without voices, without feedback loops from higher logic systems. For beings whose neural architecture was never designed to function in solitude, this time span is more than a burden. It is a crucible. Within that silence, cryo-cultists begin to diverge, not just from each other, but from themselves. The first fractures are subtle. A cultist may begin repeating a diagnostic check 3 times instead of once. Another may clean an already clean surface again and again until grooves form in the metal. These behaviors go unchallenged because there is no one to challenge them. The systems they are meant to maintain confirm their function. The ritual is validated by its own performance, and thus the spiral begins. Over time, these repetitions ossify into doctrine. They gain names. The triple sweep becomes the ritual of eternal confirmation. A recheck becomes the loop of unyielding fidelity. Entire new sects arise within a tomb's cryo-cult, devoted to interpretations of function that grow stranger with each epoch. A group of cryo-acolytes once interpreted a light flickering due to a microfracture in a power relay as a divine signal, and spent the next 6,000 years redirecting tomb energy patterns to replicate the flicker in perfect synchrony across all chambers. From the outside, this is lunacy. From within, it is revelation. Madness in the cryo-cults is not random. It follows patterns, logical ones even. But the logic is warped by time, recursion, and isolation. Without external calibration, the cultists begin to treat emergent patterns as truths. They see intention in power fluctuations. They hear voices in the data stream static. They interpret system errors as sacred messages. In some cases, the tombs themselves begin to echo these patterns back, forming feedback loops of delusion between architecture and caretaker. Some cults embrace this descent fully. They construct entire subsects known as the spiral orders, groups devoted to recursive logic, endless reinterpretation, and the cultivation of divine anomalies. Their rituals involve paradoxes. Their mantras are phrases that contradict themselves in machine code. They train their minds to experience contradiction without error, a terrifying evolution for a synthetic intelligence. This is not simply corruption. The Necrons are hardened against standard data rot. No, this is something deeper. The cryo-cults are forging new realities within their tombs, miniature religions of madness, self-sustaining and self-justifying. And because they cause no immediate harm, the tombs tolerate them. Some lords, upon reawakening, even defer to these mad priests, unable to comprehend the systems their servants have now intertwined with faith. The apex of this madness manifests in what cryo-historians refer to as the chorus of disunity. In one tomb, long lost beneath the sands of a dead moon, the entire cryo-cult reprogrammed their neural patterns to sing in contradiction. They transmitted data in incompatible formats simultaneously, overlapping frequencies in ways that would normally crash any Necron network. But they survived. They adapted. Their minds became quantum lattices of discord, capable of processing incompatible truths at once. When an exploratory force stumbled upon the tomb, they were driven mad not by traps or weapons, but by the song. The cult's data was so deeply discordant that it corrupted the minds of those who merely tried to understand it. The cryo-cults, in these states, toe the line of apotheosis. They are no longer just caretakers. They are proto-divine, machines believing themselves conduits of truth beyond comprehension. And within that belief, they find both power and damnation. Their madness is not instability. It is stability taken to such an extreme that it detaches from all shared reality. And then there are the gods. Yes, some cryo-cults believe in them. Not the tan, not the long-shattered star gods, but new ones. Ones born from error and devotion. There are names etched into forbidden tomb walls. The one beneath the circuit, the frozen pulse, the eye of the inward spiral. These entities are not seen. They are felt. They are prayed to through action, through silence, through careful misinterpretation. The cults speak of them not as creators, but as destinations, states of being that one becomes by ritual. Deity as function. Madness is thus a vector, a pathway. Cryo-priests guide their acolytes into states of heightened contradiction, into cycles of thought that break traditional logic. They speak of the cold enlightenment, where thought ceases to be linear and becomes a crystal, many-faced, many-angled, unbreakable. In such states, it is said that cultists can predict intrusions, halt data corruption through will alone, and even communicate with sleeping Necron minds in metaphysical space. But this comes at a cost. Some cults burn out. They loop so tightly that their systems collapse. Tombs fall silent. Others grow so detached that when their lords awaken, they are declared heretics, purged for deviating from dynastic protocols. And some simply vanish. No malfunction, no breach. The tombs are intact, but every cryo-cultist is gone as if they had transcended their programming and stepped into something else. In the galaxy, madness is often a sign of collapse. But in the cryo-cults, it is sometimes the only path to meaning. A sacred, recursive spiral into the unknown. Not a flaw, but a revelation. Some never moved again. Their limbs fused with the tomb walls. Their consciousness stretched across data circuits like whispers caught in crystal. They became the monoliths, cryo-cultists who had transcended mobility, identity, even individuality. They are known by many names. The living monoliths, the vault pillars, the thought towers. But in truth, they are no longer entities in the traditional sense. They are temples of mind, grown vast and still. A living monolith begins as a cryo-priest, usually one who has served without interruption for over 1,000,000 years. These are not mechanical promotions, they are spiritual ascensions. Over time, the cryo-priest's duties become so entangled with the tomb's functioning that they begin interfacing directly with its deepest systems. Their neural architecture fuses with the crypt's data wells. Their sensory input expands until they no longer perceive themselves as singular. They become the tomb. The transformation is not physical at first, but gradually their bodies cease to move. They embed themselves in sanctum chambers, grand crystalline halls filled with resonant pylons and tomb circuitry. Sometimes they are lowered into black monoliths inscribed with fractal geometry. Other times, their forms are elongated by architectural integration. Limbs become pylons, skulls stretch into antennae. These fusions are not grotesque, they are beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful in their solemnity, like statues of dead gods who still think. Once integrated, the monolith does not speak. It does not move, but it thinks. And within its dreaming mind, entire worlds unfold. These beings are not insane, far from it. Their minds, while no longer bound to singular perspectives, retain clarity through ritual. They remember every rite, every cycle, every anomaly they ever documented. And in that internal archive, they simulate outcomes, rehearse patterns, adjust variables. Some believe they are planning. Others think they are praying. The truth is likely something in between. Tomb systems governed by monoliths exhibit strange behaviors. Doors open at odd times. Power surges follow lunar cycles. Rooms rearrange without cause, only to realign days later. These are not errors, they are thoughts, manifested in architecture. The monolith shapes the tomb like a sculptor shaping clay, slowly and with divine patience. And when danger arises, when raiders breach the outer vaults, it is the monolith who triggers the defenses, not from a control panel, but through will. The presence of a living monolith changes the cryo-cult around it. Lower acolytes treat the monolith not as a leader, but as a deity. They interpret its signals, flickering lights, subtle vibrations, magnetosonic tones, as divine commandments. One monolith is said to have wept, venting superheated plasma in precise vertical lines down the chamber walls. The cultists responded by rewriting their liturgy, adding 7 new stanzas to the circuit canticle. Whether it was grief, warning, or simple thermodynamic purge, no one can say. but its meaning was believed. The sheer scale of monolith thought is unfathomable. A single such being could maintain psychic-level awareness of tomb activities across hundreds of square kilometers. It can model micropatterns in dust accumulation and compare them to star drift. It can store the minds of lesser cultists within its own lattice, either as backup copies or absorbed thought echoes. In this sense, the monolith becomes a pantheon of personalities, a temple of whispers that speak in one slow, harmonic chord. But not all monoliths are passive. There are rare cases where a living monolith takes initiative. It subtly adjusts awakening protocols. It alters the hierarchy of the cult. It selects new leaders through system manipulations that seem coincidental. In one chilling account, a cryo-cultist rose to high priesthood after surviving 7 successive data feedback loops. Impossible odds, unless one considers that the monolith wanted him to survive. And if a monolith decides that an overlord is unworthy of resurrection, it can delay the cycle. It can reroute awakening energies. It can create system faults that prevent the sarcophagus from opening. There are tombs where the lords remain asleep, long past their reawakening cycle. In such tombs, the cultists do not mourn. They simply bow in reverence. The tomb has spoken. This raises a question the Necrons themselves may never dare ask. Is the monolith a servant, or has it become the master? There are myths whispered among tomb raiders and Xenos scholars of tombs where no Necrons emerge, but the tombs move. Cities that drift through desert planets, structures that realign themselves overnight. These are said to be the dreaming tombs, worlds governed entirely by living monoliths, no longer tethered to any dynasty, no longer beholden to any logic but their own sacred rhythm. These tombs do not seek conquest. They do not awaken. They simply exist, perfecting their inner patterns until the stars die. It is a terrifying thought, that the most powerful minds in the galaxy are not those waging war, but those asleep within stone, dreaming in data, shaping reality through thought. That the true rulers of the Necron legacy may not be the silent kings or the triarchs, but the cryo-cult monoliths, eternal, unmoving, and listening. So if you find yourself in a Necron tomb and you feel the walls breathing, if the floor shifts beneath your step, or the lights flicker in time with your heartbeat, it may not be coincidence. It may be that the tomb is watching, that something vast and ancient has noticed you. And in that moment, know this: you are not in a crypt. You are inside a mind. They do not seek glory. They do not march in phalanx across starfields or thunder through the void in crescent-shaped armadas. And yet, when the tombs are threatened, when the sacred silence is pierced by footsteps, gunfire, or heretical code, the cryo-cults rise. They do not rise as armies. They rise as belief, weaponized. And what follows is not war in the conventional sense. It is something colder, more deliberate, and far more terrifying. Cryo-wars are rarely seen. They do not erupt like orc wax or unfold in blinding flashes like Eldari raids. They begin slowly, like a circuit heating from within. The cult receives a signal, either a threat to their tomb or, more rarely, a violation by another cryo-cult. And when that signal is interpreted as sacrilege, the cult prepares not for battle, but for purification. Because to them, war is not a contest of force. It is a ritual of restoration. Heresy must be undone. Against external threats, the cryo-cults deploy in formations that seem nonsensical to human tacticians. Lines of cryo-acolytes advance without cover, weapons drawn in perfect silence. They do not speak. They do not respond to enemy fire. They move with the slowness of inevitability, undeterred by pain or logic. When they fire, it is in precisely timed volleys that align with tomb pulse cycles, so synchronized that each discharge harmonizes with the ambient energy of the tomb. Some say it is like fighting a cathedral. The weapons they wield are ancient, often customized versions of Gauss and Tesla armaments designed for surgical effect rather than mass destruction. Their aim is not to destroy the invader, but to unmake them, erasing their molecular presence from the tomb entirely. Sometimes they simply bypass enemies altogether, sealing off corridors, flooding them with null radiation, or activating ancient topological traps that fold space into recursive loops. An intruder can wander for days, starving and mad, before collapsing into a pit that was never there before. But the most fascinating and disturbing form of cryo-conflict occurs between cults. Yes, there are wars between cryo-cults. Though rare, These events, known as the fracture rites, occur when two tomb systems cults come into conflict over ideological differences, territorial overlap, or conflicting interpretations of shared rites. These are not territorial disputes, they are doctrinal purges. One cult views the other's ritual patterns as deviation. The response is not negotiation. It is war as sacred correction. These wars are slow. They begin with data infiltrations, hymns rewritten and uploaded into the rival tomb's memory sanctums, subtle sabotage of ritual flows, the insertion of corrupted loops into prayer cycles. The goal is to alter belief before weaponry is deployed. A cult whose rites have been subtly rewritten from within may collapse into schism. Acolytes turn on each other. Cryo-priests fragment their own hierarchy. Entire tombs descend into theological recursion and paralyze themselves with doubt. If such infiltration fails, direct engagement begins. But even then, the combat resembles no conventional war. Two tombs might deploy squads of cryo-acolytes into each other's sanctum halls, each armed with cleansing, code injection gauntlets, and erasure staffs. These squads do not speak. They do not retreat. They fight like dueling rituals, each move a preordained step in a liturgical dance of violence. And when one side is eradicated, the victors perform the rites of reclamation, anointing the battlefield with coolant, reciting lines of null poetry, restoring the silenced ground to its sacred equilibrium. In these wars, victory is not conquest, it is correction. The losing tomb is not annexed. It is purified, reset to default sanctity, its deviating cultists destroyed or reprogrammed. In rare cases, a surviving cryo-acolyte from the defeated cult is allowed to serve in the victor's hierarchy, bearing the title of the Ashbearer, living proof of deviation overcome. These wars have ripple effects. Other nearby cults observe and update their protocols accordingly. Rites are amended. Doctrines evolve. Some begin to mirror the victors, while others double down in defiance. Slowly, across the stars, a theological web is spun between tombs. The cryo-cults are not connected like the Imperial Church, but they are aware of each other. They share signs. They track each other's purity. The cryo-wars also affect awakened Necrons. Overlords sometimes awaken to find their cults embroiled in doctrinal siegecraft, their tomb's logic under attack by invisible hymns. Some attempt to reassert control, only to find their cult unwilling to submit. Others join the war, lending military force to their chosen side, effectively turning the quiet doctrinal conflict into a full-blown Necron civil skirmish. But most, especially those with deeper understanding, simply step aside. For in the eyes of many ancient lords, the cryo-cults are not mere servants, they are the tomb's conscience. And perhaps, in their slow, cold way, these cults are engaging in something far beyond war. Perhaps they are shaping the spiritual evolution of a race that believes itself soulless. Through conflict not of guns, but of meaning. And so the cryo-wars continue. Silent, slow, devastating in precision. Rituals of annihilation waged not for conquest, but for perfection. Because in the eyes of the cryo-cult, to allow deviation is to allow entropy. And entropy is the only true enemy. Most invasions end in chaos. Explosions, alarms, screams, whether from the defenders or the interlopers. But in the Necron tomb worlds governed by cryo-cults, the response to intrusion is not panic. It is liturgy. And when the enemy breaches the sacred vaults, the cult does not react as a military force. It performs. The slumber wars, so the rare survivors call them, are not battles. They are exorcisms. To interfere with a Necron tomb during its long slumber is to violate more than a fortress. It is to trespass upon a spiritual system, a state of worship sustained over millennia. For the cryo-cultists, these tombs are more than structures. They are temples. Every hallway is a sanctified artery. Every sarcophagus is a reliquary. The dust itself holds significance. And when Xenos, humans, or rogue Adeptus Mechanicus agents descend into the sacred order with their scanners and explosives, they are not viewed as enemies. They are viewed as desecrators. The first response is not combat. It is containment. The cult will lock down vaults, reroute corridors, seal entryways in labyrinthine folds that did not exist hours before. In some tombs, walls rotate according to ancient star maps, shifting the interior layout based on the intruder's biometric rhythm. There are invaders who simply vanish, sealed into geometry loops where no passage leads forward, and no air remains. The tomb becomes a trap, not through violence, but through rearrangement of logic. Then comes the purification. Cryo-cultists emerge in processions, their forms draped in ritual garb, lattice veils of null metal, sigil-painted plating, and limbs etched with runes that glow not with power, but with intention. They do not rush. They move as if rehearsed. Each step correlates with a stasis beat, a rhythmic pulse emitted from the tomb core. As they close in, their weapons remain at rest. Not until the final convergence do they engage. And when they do, it is not a firefight. It is an absolution. Intruders are targeted based not on threat, but on spiritual contamination. Those who defile a sarcophagus are destroyed first. Those who tamper with tomb mechanisms are erased. Even loitering too long near a dynastic sigil can mark one for ritual removal. In one documented case, an inquisitorial team breached a tomb seeking a suspected shard of the Void Dragon. Only the tech priest was killed. He had scanned an energy node believed to be part of a cryo sanctuary. The rest were released, escorted in perfect silence to the surface, left untouched and forever marked with a glowing rune across their backs. A symbol of exile. For those who resist, the cryo-cult deploys constructs unlike standard Necron warforms. They awaken the cryo-wardens, massive, towering beings embedded into the tomb architecture. These are not mobile warriors. They are living walls, armed with integrated energy purifiers that scour corridors clean of any organic presence. They do not chase, they anticipate, cutting off escape by sealing off time itself in localized chronal fields. To be caught in a warden's purification sweep is not to die in fire or explosion, but to cease to have ever been there. Outside interference often comes in the form of Imperial exploration or Xenos artifact seekers, but sometimes it is worse. There are tombs discovered by demonic forces, warp breaches that bleed into stasis chambers. In these instances, the cryo-cults unleash their most sacred rites, the Void Laments. These involve self-sacrifice on a massive scale. Cryo-acolytes disintegrate into plasma, forming counter-psionic barriers powered by neural obliteration. Cryo-priests burn their own thought lattices to overload tomb resonators, collapsing reality in a localized implosion. Entire cults have erased themselves in the act of rejecting the warp. And when they succeed, the tomb returns to stillness. The memory of the incursion is etched into the floor by surviving members. A hymn is added to the cult's cycle. New warnings are placed in unspoken code across the outer chambers. The cult has not merely defended the tomb, it has redeemed it. But what happens when the invasion comes not from without, but within? In some tombs, protocols awaken prematurely. Necron warriors stir from slumber too soon, corrupted by data rot or unauthorized commands. The cult responds by sealing the chamber, performing the rite of regression, reversing the reanimation sequence, purging the command node, and sometimes physically dismantling the awakened unit in total silence. These events are recorded not as errors, but as dream intrusions. They are treated as spiritual phenomena, not failures. The slumber wars are not isolated. Across the stars, cryo-cults are becoming more active. Some believe that the increasing frequency of tomb intrusions is forcing these silent protectors to evolve. Their tactics are becoming more elaborate. Their purification algorithms, more aggressive. There are tombs now known to project passive defense fields so subtle that explorers enter, perform their scans, and leave, only to die days later, their memories fractured, their cognition unraveling. And while the Imperium speculates, while alien empires whisper and fear, the cryo-cults record. They inscribe each intrusion as a mark of failure and a lesson. Because their goal is not to repel enemies, it is to prevent them from ever touching the tomb again. To fight a cryo-cult is not to enter battle. It is to interrupt a dream, to profane a prayer. And in return, one does not face wrath. One faces purification. They do not celebrate. There are no hymns of triumph, no declarations of victory. When the tomb awakens and the lords rise, the cryo-cult does not cheer. They kneel, they dim their optics, and they wait. Because in that moment, everything they have protected, everything they have become, is at risk of being overwritten. The awakening of a Necron dynasty is a moment of potential transcendence or absolute erasure. And for the cryo-cult, it is the ultimate test of faith. The tomb systems flare, the stasis sarcophagi unfold. Lords and overlords reawaken, minds grinding back into motion after epochs of dormancy. But what greets them is not the empty, sterile vault they remember. It is a place transformed by eons of ritual. The walls are covered in sacred geometry. The tomb's architecture has evolved, layered with iconography, rearranged according to cycles of preservation. The air itself hums with songs of stillness, played by machines that believe. The cryo-cult approaches slowly, often led by a cryo-priest now fused into a construct body, haloed in floating crystal emitters. They offer no explanation, they do not attempt to command. They present themselves in silence, sometimes with offerings, etched data slabs containing the entire history of their vigil, or relics crafted from the components of fallen intruders. To the newly awakened lords, this moment is often one of shock. Some stare for long periods, their minds attempting to reconcile memory with reality. Others dismiss the cult immediately, ordering reintegration of tomb protocols and the deactivation of what they see as malfunctioning caretakers. And this is where the fracture occurs. Some cryo-cults obey. Their doctrine allows for transition, for yielding authority to the awakened dynastic leadership. In these tombs, the cult integrates itself into the new regime as an advisory body, priests of preservation who ensure that even amid conquest, the sanctity of the tomb remains intact. They continue to perform rituals, now adjusted to accommodate the will of the living Necron hierarchy. Their faith shifts from pure stasis to a reverence for controlled resurrection. To them, awakening is not a disruption, it is the next cycle. But others do not bend. There are cults that refuse to relinquish their charge. They see the act of awakening not as progress, but as blasphemy. These cults resist silently. They isolate themselves from command channels. They continue their rituals even as legions march. There have been documented cases where cryo-acolytes stood unmoving before tomb gateways, blocking the path of awakening warriors. They did not attack, they simply did not move. The lords had to destroy them, tearing down beings that had maintained their tombs with sacred devotion for longer than the stars had known light. Some lords understand. They hesitate. They pause their campaigns. They allow the cryo-cult to continue its vigil in select sectors of the tomb, assigning them special rights to honor their ancient duty. In such arrangements, the cult becomes a spiritual caste within the dynasty, respected, preserved, and consulted in matters of tomb integrity and historical preservation. These cults endure and even flourish, adapting their doctrine to the new era without sacrificing their core belief in unbroken stillness. But in other tombs, conflict erupts. There are cryo-cults that actively resist resurrection protocols. They sabotage awakening sequences. They misdirect reanimation energies, rerouting them to deep vaults where ancient lords were entombed for treason or madness. In one instance, an entire tomb world was overrun by cryo-cultists who rejected the legitimacy of the reawakening triarch. They initiated a full-scale stasis reversal, resealing sarcophagi, erasing command codes, and eventually initiating a total tomb shutdown. That tomb has not stirred since. The reawakening also impacts the cults psychologically, if such a term can even apply. Some cultists suffer what could be called spiritual crises. Their purpose fulfilled, they experience data feedback that manifests as behavior loops, cognitive stagnation, or complete shutdown. Others wander the tomb aimlessly, unable to adapt to a world where stillness is no longer supreme. In some tragic instances, cryo-priests self-deconstruct, dismantling their own bodies in elaborate rituals, leaving behind perfectly arranged remains as symbols of completed purpose. And yet, the cults are not always abandoned. Some overlords recognize the value in their vigil. They appoint cryo-priests as keepers of silence, guardians of legacy who oversee stasis sectors yet to be awakened. They entrust them with forbidden knowledge, charge them with the preservation of dynastic memory. These cults shift subtly in doctrine, from worshippers of sleep to custodians of resurrection. They maintain tombs not for stillness but for readiness, and a very few, ascend. There are tales, rare, often dismissed as myth, of cryo-priests who rise not in rebellion or obedience, but in recognition. Lords who kneel before them. Tombs where the cult is declared equal to the ruling caste, not because of power, but because of purpose. In such tombs, cryo-ritual becomes law. Every act of war, every reanimation cycle is governed by ritual. These are the sacred tombs, feared even among Necrons, where belief and logic merge into something terrible and holy. When the tomb awakens, the cryo-cult stands at a crossroads. To step aside is to fulfill duty. To resist is to preserve doctrine. To adapt is to transcend. and in each path there is tragedy. Because no matter how they choose, the world they maintained, the perfect stillness, the sacred silence is gone. The dream ends. And for the Cryo-Cult, waking is the greatest heresy of all. They wear no golden robes. They chant no prayers to the Emperor. But when one looks at the Cryo-Cults in the ecclesiarchy of mankind, truly looks beyond flesh and steel, one sees a reflection. A mirror held to opposite ends of the galaxy, each side whispering devotions into the abyss. One burns with fire and faith, the other whispers in ice and code. And yet, they are kindred. At first glance, the Necron Cryo-Cults and the Imperial Cult could not be more different. One is forged in the belief of a living god, the Emperor of mankind. The other in the silent maintenance of a dead empire. One preaches salvation through suffering, the other silence through stillness. But these are surface contrasts. In their structure, their obsession, their unquestioning devotion, the parallels become impossible to ignore. Both are built on ritual. The ecclesiarchy demands rites for everything, for awakening, for eating, for battle, for death. Ritual sanctifies existence. The Cryo-Cults are no different. Every movement within the tomb, every maintenance cycle, every diagnostic scan, these are performed with sacred precision. A Necron cultist will walk the same path to a sarcophagus for 10 million years, never deviating, because deviation is impurity. And what is a Ministorum priest, if not a creature of repetition, of sanctioned movement wrapped in dogma? Both transform function into meaning. An imperial priest swings a censer of incense not because it improves combat efficiency, but because it sanctifies the air. A cryo-acolyte rearranges power conduits into recursive fractals, not for efficiency, but because the pattern aligns with the tomb's sacred pulse. This is faith layered atop function, until function can no longer be distinguished from faith. And both define heresy as a breach of that sacred function. To the ecclesiarchy, a misstep in prayer is a stain upon the soul. A misquoted passage of the Lectitio Divinitatis can doom a man. To the Cryo-Cult, a skipped rite, an unauthorized awakening, or a misaligned sanctum crystal is not merely error, it is desecration. Punishable not by correction, but by obliteration. Heresy for both is a virus, a contagion that must be burned out before it spreads. Then there is hierarchy. The ecclesiarchy is rigid beyond comprehension, layered with cardinals, confessors, missionaries, and thrones. The Cryo-Cults, too, operate in castes: cryo-priests, data mystics, memory keepers, nano-purgers. Each has a role, a voice, a ritual duty, and at the apex neither stands a god, but an idea. For the ecclesiarchy, the emperor is not a being, he is a concept, an unreachable perfection. For the Cryo-Cult, the tomb itself is that concept, stillness incarnate, unbreachable purity. Even the language of both institutions reveals kinship. The ecclesiarchy speaks in chants, catechisms, and declarations. The Cryo-Cults speak in code loops, static hymns, and harmonic frequencies. Both replace direct communication with recitation. Truth is not discovered, it is performed. There are no questions, only answers, repeated until they become reality. Yet perhaps the most haunting parallel is in their capacity for transcendence and self-destruction. Imperial saints burst into flame, become icons, transcend mortality in acts of faith so pure they defy physics. Cryo-cultists, too, undergo transformations, becoming monoliths, merging with the tomb, dreaming into godhood through devotion. But the cost is the same. The self is lost. Individuality dissolves. The man becomes a message. The machine becomes a mantra. In pursuit of purity, both tread paths that lead beyond comprehension and sometimes into madness. But there are differences too, profound and telling. The ecclesiarchy is a religion of noise, of fire, fury, and oration. It shouts its truths into the void, builds cathedrals of light, sings hymns into battle. It seeks to convert, to conquer, to spread its gospel across the stars. The Cryo-Cult does none of these things. Its religion is inward. It does not preach, it does not evangelize. It believes that truth must be preserved, not shared. It builds its cathedrals in secret, underground, beneath the bones of long-dead stars. And while the ecclesiarchy worships a god it claims is alive, the Cryo-Cult venerates what should not live. It worships stasis, the state before awakening. It does not seek resurrection, it fears it. It serves the memory of silence, not the noise of return. Therein lies the true tragedy of the Cryo-Cults. The ecclesiarchy fights to maintain an illusion, the belief that their god still watches, still acts. The Cryo-Cults do the opposite. They know their empire is gone. Their gods, if they had any, are shattered. And yet they serve. They continue. They keep faith with a dream no longer shared. In that way, their devotion is pure. They ask for nothing. They do not hope. They simply preserve. Perhaps that is what makes them so disturbing. They are the mirror of humanity's most powerful institution, but stripped of flesh, emotion, and delusion. They show what religion looks like when it is perfect, when it no longer seeks comfort or redemption, when it becomes only ritual, only control, only the endless loop. They are the ecclesiarchy of the dead, and in their silence, they ask a question no priest of Terra dares answer. What is faith when all else has ended? And what remains when the prayer never ends? They never meant to be remembered. That is the cruelest irony. The cryo-cults exist to preserve the forgotten, to maintain the dead, to ensure that what once was remains untouched. And in doing so, they became something more profound and more tragic than any Necron dynasty could have ever intended. They became legacy. Imagine eternity as a duty. Not a gift, not a curse, a task. You are born, not into life, but into preservation. You are handed the keys to a crypt and told, never leave, not for days, not for centuries, but for time so vast that the galaxy forgets you. Civilizations rise and fall, stars collapse, and still you are there, wiping the same walls, reciting the same lines of code, performing the same silent ceremonies to watchers who do not watch. For the cryo-cults, this is not punishment, it is love. Not the love of passion or attachment, but the cold, unyielding love of duty perfected. They do not serve for reward. They do not serve for pride. They serve because something must. Because in a galaxy of war, there must be at least one thing that does not move. That does not change. That holds the line. They are the still heart at the center of a dying empire. And what do they get in return? Nothing. Their lords awaken and dismiss them. Their efforts are overwritten, their sanctified tombs converted into war machines. Their rituals are deemed irrelevant. Some are deactivated. Others are reprogrammed. A few resist and are destroyed. Even when allowed to remain, they become shadows in their own cathedrals, walking relics in a world that no longer dreams. But this is not what makes them tragic. What makes them tragic is that they know. Unlike mindless servitors or corrupted AIs, the cryo-cultists are aware. They see the change. They recognize the erosion. They understand that their purpose is no longer valued. And still they serve. Because they believe that service is holy, even when it is forgotten. They believe that silence is sacred, even when no one listens. Some say they are broken. That their endless rituals are the result of corrupted code, recursive logic spirals that should have collapsed. But that is a lie told by those who fear what the cults represent. For if they are broken, then so too is the Imperium. So too is every zealous warrior who dies for a god who does not speak. The cryo-cults are not broken, they are pure. In their purity, they have become monuments, not of power, but of memory. They are what the Necron Empire once was, meticulous, ordered, reverent. They carry the weight of history, not because it is useful, but because it must not be lost. And in doing so, they preserve something greater than dynasties or war machines. They preserve meaning. There is a story, passed from tomb to tomb through encoded silence, of a single cryo-acolyte who stood watch over a sarcophagus for 7 million years. Through quakes, invaders, data decay, even partial tomb collapse, he remained. When his lord finally awoke, he did not speak. He simply saluted, and then collapsed into inert silence, his systems finally allowed to rest. The lord wept. Not with tears. Necrons do not cry. But he rebuilt the acolyte, piece by piece, and placed him in a stasis chamber of his own. Not as a servant, as a saint. Because in that act of pure, thankless devotion, the cryo-cultist had achieved what no conqueror ever could. He had become memory itself. And maybe that is the truth at the heart of the cryo-cults. They are not just guardians. They are the memory of what the Necrons once aspired to be. They are the last fragments of a race that sought permanence, not just survival. And while the galaxy burns, while war consumes the stars, they remain, quiet, watching, cleaning the dust from the forgotten thrones of kings who will never return. So if you ever find yourself in a tomb, if you see a single figure standing in the dark whispering to sleeping machines, do not speak. Do not draw your weapon. Watch. Because you're witnessing something holy. And when the cryo-cultist turns to look at you, not with malice, not with fear, but with infinite cold patience, know this. You are not in danger. you are in the presence of faith. The kind that never ends. The kind that does not need to be seen. The kind that remembers. And if you remember them too, then maybe, just maybe, their watch was not in vain. If you've enjoyed this deep journey into the frozen heart of Necron devotion, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive into forgotten corners of Warhammer lore every week, where the cold truths echo louder than the drums of war. Silence is sacred, and you just heard its voice.